11 Japanese fighters circled above like vultures over carrion. One American Corsair bled fuel in altitude somewhere between Prayer and the Pacific Ocean. 50 feet. The manual said this was death. Every instructor, every briefing, every survival lecture hammered the same gospel into young pilots' heads. Altitude equals life. Speed equals safety. Never under any circumstances take a fighter down to wave level. Jack Brennan pushed the stick forward anyway. The ocean rushed up to meet him, gray and endless, and utterly indifferent to the mathematics of survival. Water spray hit the canopy. The engine roared louder in the thick air, every cylinder screaming against physics and common sense. His hands remembered other mornings, other fields flying 10 feet above Kansas wheat, with Frank Morrison's voice in his headset. Smooth boy, trust the ground. But there was no ground here. Only water that would kill him, just as dead as the zeros above. 3,000 feet higher, Takeshi Yamamoto saw the Corsair dive and felt confusion cut through his training. The radio crackled with voices. American going down, easy kill. His squadron mates pulled up, unwilling to follow into that narrow space between ocean and oblivion. They had been taught the same absolutes. Altitude equals survival. The vertical fight belongs to the zero. Americans always climb because they have no choice. But this one dove. Yamamoto's hand tightened on the stick. His instructor's words echoed from 2 years prior, back when the war still felt like an adventure instead of an abattoir. The Americans are cowards. They worship comfort in material things. They will break when confronted with true warriors. When you face them, show no mercy. Their weakness is in their souls. He watched the Corsair level off 50 feet above the waves, and something in his chest tightened. That was not weakness. That was something else entirely. Yamamoto rolled his zero inverted and followed. 30 seconds earlier, before the dive, before the decision that would chain two lives together across 40 years, and an ocean of blood, survival still seemed like a possibility someone else might enjoy. Jack Brennan's fuel gauge read 8 minutes, maybe 10 if he leaned the mixture and the engine didn't quit. The formation had scattered like seed in a windstorm. Captain Frank Morgan's voice barked orders that made sense 5 minutes ago and meant nothing now. Somewhere to his left, David Chen's Corsair trailed smoke. Somewhere to his right, the bombers they were supposed to protect droned on toward Rabaul, heavy and slow and committed to a course that would get them all killed. He thought about Sarah, about the letter tucked in his flight suit pocket, the one where she told him about the church social and the wheat harvest and how their neighbor's boy had come home without his legs. Come home safe, Jack. That was all she asked. Not come home a hero, not come home with medals. Just come home. The zeros dove through the formation like hammers through glass. He saw it happen in fragments. Johnny Mason's Corsair taking hits. The engine coughing, black smoke. Mason trying to climb because the manual said to climb. The zero following him up, patient, methodical, certain. The explosion was small and bright and final. Mason never got out. The ocean swallowed the wreckage in seconds, leaving nothing but white foam that looked like a scar on the water's face. That made 3 this week. 3 men who followed the rules and died anyway. Brennan looked at the altimeter. 12,000 feet. The textbook answer was clear. Maintain altitude. Use speed. Stand away from the engagement. Live to fight another day. He thought about Morrison instead. 16 years earlier, a different sky, a different war that was not yet a war. Kansas spread out below like a quilt stitched from drought and determination. Jack Brennan was 20 years old and learning how to fly in the only school that mattered. 10 feet above the corn, Frank Morrison's voice crackled through the headset with the patience of a man who had seen too many young pilots plant themselves in the prairie. Sun altitude's a luxury. Down here at 10 feet, you got no time to panic. Smooth hands, clear head. The ground will save you if you trust it. The steerman had started to stall. The nose dropped. The earth came up fast. Every instinct screamed to pull back to haul the stick into his gut and pray for lift. But Morrison's voice stayed calm. Easy now, don't fight it. Let the air do the work. Brennan remembered how the plane had settled into ground effect like a hand catching a fall. The wings found purchase in air compressed against the wheat field. Speed bled off. Control returned. He landed without killing himself or Morrison or the dreams his mother had for him. That night, Morrison's wife served them breakfast at sunset. Eggs and bacon and toast and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The bacon hissed and popped in the pan grease spattering on the stove. Steam rose from the cups. The kitchen smelled like every good morning Jack had ever known. Morrison had looked at him across the table with eyes that had seen the first war, the one they called great, before they knew another was coming. Funny thing about bacon, Jack. Smells the same whether you're rich or poor. That's America right there. Doesn't matter who you are. Good food, fair treatment, chance to make something of yourself. Long as you're willing to work for it. Jack Brennan learned more about flying from breakfast conversations than he ever did from manuals. He learned more about America too. 7,000 miles away, a different teacher taught different lessons to a different student in a different language that carried the same certainties all doomed empires speak. Tokyo, 1938. Takeshi Yamamoto was 15 years old and believed everything his instructors told him because he had no reason not to. The classroom smelled of chalk and discipline and the particular tension that comes from education designed to shape weapons instead of minds. Maps covered the walls, the Pacific Ocean vast and waiting, China already bleeding under Japanese boots, Southeast Asia ripe for the taking, and beyond it all America, fat, lazy, decadent, weak. The teacher's voice carried the authority of someone who had never questioned an order in his life. The Americans worship material comfort above honor. They are soft people who have forgotten how to sacrifice. When Japan's spirit meets their hollow prosperity, they will collapse like paper in rain. You will fly for the emperor. You will show them what true warriors can do. Takeshi wrote every word in his notebook with the careful strokes his calligraphy master had taught him. He believed because everyone he respected said the same things. America was the enemy. America was weak. America would fall. He did not know about bacon, about the smell of coffee on Sunday mornings, or the way light came through kitchen windows in Kansas farmhouses. He did not know about men like Frank Morrison, who flew crop dusters and taught patience and kindness to boys who would later fight men like him. He knew hunger, though. Rice rationing had started the year before. His mother made meals stretch across more days than food should cover. Some nights he went to bed with his stomach tight and his dreams thin. The teacher said this was temporary. After the war, after victory, Japan would prosper. They just had to endure. They just had to believe. Takeshi believed. The two paths that would intersect over the Pacific on February 5, 1944, began in classrooms separated by everything except the certainty that comes before the world teaches you otherwise. Jack Brennan married Sarah Mitchell in the spring of 1942, 3 months after Pearl Harbor turned the ocean into a graveyard. She taught second grade in Hayes and played piano at the Methodist Church and had eyes that made him forget how to talk the first time he saw her. The wedding was small. His mother cried. Her father, a veteran of the First War, shook his hand and said only this: "Do your duty. Come home. Nothing else matters." He enlisted 2 weeks later. Takeshi Yamamoto entered flight school in 1941 with 200 other boys who believed they were blessed to die for something larger than themselves. They learned to fly in stages, each step eliminating the weak until only the hardest remained. By 1943, he was in China flying Zero fighters against pilots who had nowhere to run and no hope of reinforcement. He learned to kill efficiently. He learned that Americans, when you caught them, bled the same red as everyone else. He did not learn mercy. No one taught that subject. Both men arrived at the Pacific Theater in late 1943. Both carried the weight of training that promised survival through superior skill and unwavering adherence to doctrine. Both discovered that war makes liars of instructors. Jack Brennan stepped off the transport at Bougainville in January 1944 with a sea bag full of gear and a head full of certainties about to be tested against physics and fear. Marine Fighter Squadron 5, MF-124, operated from Tokina Airstrip, a muddy gash carved into jungle and coral, and the particular desperation that comes from fighting 10,000 miles from home. The ready room smelled of mildew and sweat and cigarette smoke that never quite cleared. Maps of Rabaul covered the walls, pinned and scarred from months of failed hopes. The intelligence officer briefed them in a voice that had gone flat from repetition. Expected opposition heavy. Maintain altitude. Protect the bombers. Return if possible. That phrase did more work than any officer would admit. David Chen found him after the briefing. Chen was 25 Chinese-American navigator and wingman assigned to fly on Brennan's wing because someone had to, and the squadron was running low on choices. His family was in Manzanar, locked behind wire because the government that sent him to war did not quite trust people who looked like the enemy. They stood outside the ready room, watching the sun set over jungle that did not care about their problems. Chen lit a cigarette with hands that shook just slightly. "You ever crop dust?" Brennan nodded. 6 years. Kansas and Nebraska mostly. Wheat corn, some cotton down in Oklahoma. Chen smiled tired. "My dad's a doctor. I'm here proving we're loyal Americans. You're here because you can fly low. Guess we both don't fit the picture." Brennan thought about that. Thought about Morrison and bacon breakfasts and the particular grace of a country that fed you before it asked you to die for it. "I fit just fine. You do too. Anyone says different doesn't understand what we're fighting for." Chen looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll fly on your wing. Just don't get us both killed doing something crazy." "No promises," Brennan said. The first mission came 3 days later. 8 Corsairs, 12 bombers, 400 miles round trip to Rabaul and back. The math was simple and brutal. They would arrive at the edge of their fuel range. The Japanese would be waiting. Some would not return. Johnny Mason flew lead that day. He was from Ohio, 23 years old, Methodist like Sarah's family, talked too much about a girl named Betty, who wrote him letters that smelled like perfume. He followed every rule in the manual because the manual was written by men who survived, and survival meant doing what they said. The zeros came from above sun behind them, discipline perfected through hundreds of kills. They dove through the formation at speeds that turned airplanes into bullets. Mason's Corsair took hits in the first pass. His engine started smoking. He did exactly what the book said. Climbed. Tried to gain altitude. Tried to use speed to extend away. The Zero followed him up like a cat following a wounded bird. Brennan watched it happen from 2,000 feet away and understood with terrible clarity that doctrine was going to kill them all. Mason's Corsair exploded at 8,000 feet. The fireball was small and bright and impersonal. The ocean swallowed the pieces. No parachute, no time, no mercy from physics or the enemy or the rules that promised altitude would save you. That night, Brennan could not sleep. He sat in his tent with a notebook and a pencil in the particular insomnia that comes from watching friends die because everyone followed orders. David Chen found him at 0200 drawn by lamplight and shared helplessness. "What are you working on?" Brennan showed him the sketches. Combat geometry, attack angles, the vertical space where zeros dominated because American fighters kept trying to climb. Numbers that did not lie. Calculations that showed a truth no one wanted to see. The zero zone, 5,000 to 20,000 feet. We keep giving them that space. Every time we climb, we play their game. Chen studied the drawings. "So what do you do?" "Go low," Brennan tapped the notebook. "Morrison used to say the ground would save you if you trusted it. What if the ocean works the same way? What if we go so low, they can't follow?" Chen looked at him like he was proposing suicide, which by every standard they had been taught he was. "That's insane." Brennan thought about Johnny Mason, about the explosion, about Betty back in Ohio, who would get a telegram instead of a husband. Yeah, but staying high is getting us killed anyway. The letter from Sarah arrived the next morning. It was 3 pages of neat handwriting on paper that smelled like home. She told him about the wheat coming in early, about the church social where Mrs. Henderson's pie took first prize again, about the neighbor's boy who came home missing parts of himself that could not be replaced. At the end, in handwriting that looked more careful than the rest, she wrote this: "Come home safe, Jack. I don't need you to be a hero. I need you to teach our children how to fly someday. That's all. Just come home." He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his flight suit pocket, where it would stay for the next 4 months, through every mission, through the moment when everything changed. Major William Hayes ran intelligence for the squadron. He had been a pilot once before a crash in 1943, took his left leg and left him with a limp, and the particular bitterness of men who watch from the ground while others fly. He found Brennan in the maintenance hangar 2 days after Mason died. "I heard you've been asking questions." Brennan looked up from the Corsair he had been inspecting. The belly of the aircraft specifically, clearance measurements, how close you could fly to something without hitting it. "Just trying to understand why we keep losing, sir." Hayes pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered one. Brennan shook his head. Hayes lit up and studied him through smoke. You think you have an answer, maybe. Brennan showed him the notebook. The calculations, the theory that everyone would call crazy until it worked. Hayes read it all, twice, then looked at Brennan with eyes that had seen too many good ideas die in committee. You're talking about flying at wave top level. 50 feet or less. Yes, sir. That's not tactics. That's suicide with extra steps. Brennan thought about how to explain Morrison, about crop dusting and ground effect, and the way thick air could hold an airplane if you trusted it, about how sometimes the most dangerous place was actually the safest because no one expected you to go there. Permission to try it, sir. Solo. If it works, maybe we teach it. If I crash, you can tell everyone I was crazy and leave it at that. Hayes smoked his cigarette down to nothing, stared at the Corsair like it held answers, finally nodded. One flight, alone. You crash, it's on you. You survive. We talk about what comes next. Brennan flew the test 3 days later, alone at dawn when the ocean was flat and the light was honest about what would kill you. He took the Corsair down to 50 feet and stayed there for 12 minutes testing limits that had never been tested because everyone assumed they would kill you. The water spray hit the canopy. The engine roared in air so thick it felt like flying through syrup. Every control input mattered more. Every decision had no margin for error. He jinked left and right, practicing evasion patterns, learned from dodging irrigation equipment 10 feet above Kansas. He tested throttle control speed variation, the way ground effect cushioned the wings when you got close enough to the surface. He almost died twice. Once when a swell came up faster than expected and his wingtip brushed the spray. Once when he pushed a turn too hard and the Corsair tried to swap ends. Morrison's voice in his head, calm as Sunday morning. Easy, boy, don't fight it. Let the air do the work. He landed with hands shaking and fuel for another 5 minutes. Sergeant Roy Tucker ran to the aircraft, face pale. Sir, you were so low I lost you in the waves. Thought you'd crashed. Brennan climbed out on legs that barely held him. Not crashed, just found where they won't follow. That afternoon he asked Tucker to adjust his gun sight. Lower it 2 degrees, Tucker understood immediately. You're going back down there. If it works, others will too. Need the sight calibrated for low-angle shots. Tucker made the adjustment without another word. Loyalty sometimes looks like silence and a wrench. The night before the Rabaul mission, February 4th, 1944, Jack Brennan sat in his tent cleaning his flight gear with the methodical attention of a man preparing for something that might be his last act. David Chen brought him coffee, sat down without asking. They did not talk much. The radio played something from before the war, back when music was about dancing instead of remembering. Outside the jungle made the sounds jungles make when they are full of things that want to kill you. You really think this will work? Chen's voice was quiet. Brennan thought about Morrison, about Sarah, about Johnny Mason and the fireball, and all the doctrine in the world that could not save a man when the geometry was wrong. I think it's worth trying. What if you're wrong? Then I'll be wrong at 50 feet instead of 12,000. Either way, I'm dead. Yeah, but at least I'll choose how. Chen nodded. That's something, I guess. They sat in silence until the coffee was gone and the radio played the national anthem because stations still signed off at midnight back then. Chen stood to leave, paused at the tent flap. I'll follow you down if you need me to. Stay high, Brennan said. Someone needs to bring the bombers home. 3,000 miles west, Takeshi Yamamoto received his briefing for the same mission in a different language, carrying the same weight. American bombers expected. Maximum interception. Show no mercy. The Emperor depends on our strength. He cleaned his flight gear with the same attention to detail as the American he would meet the next day. He wrote a letter to his mother that said nothing important because censors read everything and some truths were too dangerous to speak. He thought about the last time he had eaten a full meal, which was longer ago than he wanted to admit. Tomorrow he would fly. Tomorrow he would fight. Tomorrow, if the Buddha smiled, he would kill Americans and prove that Japan's spirit could overcome their material wealth. He did not know about the letter in Jack Brennan's pocket, about Sarah or Morrison or bacon breakfast or any of the small graces that make a country worth defending. He knew only what his instructors taught. Americans were the enemy. Victory was certain. Honor demanded everything. Both men slept poorly that night. Both dreamed of flight. Both woke before dawn to engines warming, and radios crackling with final checks. February 5th, 1944, arrived without ceremony or mercy. The briefing was identical to every other briefing except in the one way that mattered. This time, Jack Brennan knew he was not coming back the same way he left. Captain Morgan stood at the front of the ready room, voice-tired eyes harder than they had been 6 months ago. 12 SBD dive bombers, 6 Corsair escorts. Target is Japanese shipping at Rabaul Harbor. Expected opposition is 20 to 30 zeros. Weather is clear. Fuel is maximum range. If you're jumped, climb. If you can't climb, extend. If you can't extend, bail out over water and pray the Navy finds you. He did not mention the fourth option because he did not know it existed yet. Brennan and Chen walked to their aircraft in silence. The sun was just breaking over the ocean, turning the water gold and beautiful, and completely indifferent to the bilans about to happen above it. Sergeant Tucker finished the final checks, handed Brennan a thumbs up. "Gun sight set, sir. Good hunting." Brennan climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, checked fuel oil instruments. Everything read normal. Everything was ready except his hands, which wanted to shake and had to be forced into stillness. The engine caught on the second try. 18 cylinders roared to life. The propeller became a blur. Radio check. Formation check. All 6 Corsairs showing green. Tower cleared them. 6 fighters rolled down the strip, gained speed, lifted into the morning sky. The ocean spread beneath them, endless and patient. In another sky, 11 Zeros did the same dance in a different language. Takeshi Yamamoto flew in the second element wing position, ready to follow his leader into combat. The briefing had been specific. Americans inbound to Rabaul, maximum interception. Destroy them all. He checked his guns, tested his radio, scanned the horizon for the enemy he had been trained to hate and never question. The 2 formations converged at 0847 hours, 14,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, 2 nations colliding in a space measured in seconds and bullets. Brennan saw them first. Sunlight flashing off canopies. Too high, too many, too perfect. Bandits 12 o'clock high. Angels 20. Captain Morgan's voice came back steady. Maintain formation. Prepare for bounce. The Zeros rolled inverted and dove. In the 5 seconds before contact, Jack Brennan made the decision that would chain his life to a stranger's across 40 years in an ocean of regret and grace. He pushed the stick forward. David Chen's voice cracked through the radio. "Jack, where are you going?" "Somewhere they won't follow." The Corsair dropped through 10,000 feet, 8,000, 5,000. The ocean rushed up to meet him. Every manual ever written screamed at him to climb. Every instinct said this was death. Frank Morrison's voice calm as Sunday morning. "Trust the ground, son." He leveled off at 50 feet. Water spray hit the canopy. The world compressed into a narrow band of ocean and sky and the immediate mathematics of not dying. Above him, 10 Zeros pulled up. The 11th kept coming. Takeshi Yamamoto saw the American dive and felt something break in his understanding of how enemies behaved. "Coward," his wingman said, "let him go." But Yamamoto had seen the way the Corsair moved. Not panicked, not fleeing, deliberate, controlled. Going somewhere with purpose. That was not cowardice. That was something else. He rolled his Zero and followed the American down toward the ocean and the truth that would reshape both their lives. At 50 feet above the Pacific, 2 warriors who had been taught to hate each other began a dance that would end in ways neither could imagine. One would spare the other's life. Both would carry the weight of that moment across decades. And 40 years later, in a place neither expected, they would meet again and discover what mercy looks like when it has time to grow. But that was later. First, they had to survive the next 8 minutes. The chase began. The ocean at 50 feet does not forgive mistakes. It does not care about courage or training or the prayers your mother whispered when you left for war. It waits with the patience of something that has swallowed 1,000,000 men and will swallow 1,000,000 more. Jack Brennan flew into that narrow space where the air thickened and every breath the engine took felt like it might be the last. Water spray streaked across the canopy in patterns that looked like rain, but tasted like salt and fear. The Corsair shuddered in the dense air, every rivet and seam complaining about being asked to fly where airplanes were never meant to go. Behind him, 3,000 feet higher and closing fast, Takeshi Yamamoto pushed his Zero into a dive that violated every principle of safe combat flying. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. Too low. Break off. Let the coward run. But Yamamoto had seen the way the Corsair moved, the smoothness of the dive, the controlled leveling at an altitude that should have panicked any rational pilot. This American was not running. He was choosing his battlefield. Honor demanded pursuit. The first minute of the chase taught Yamamoto that everything he knew about combat was wrong. He lined up his gun sight at 400 feet perfect deflection angle, the American fat and slow, and trapped against the ocean. His finger tightened on the trigger. 20-millimeter cannon ready to tear the Corsair apart. Then the American jinked. Not a gentle turn, not a textbook evasion. A violent snap roll left that used a swell as a reference point, the Corsair's wingtip brushing spray as it carved through air too thick for normal flight. Yamamoto's tracers stitched the water where the American had been half a second before. He pulled up hard to avoid the ocean, his Zero protesting the sudden G-force's engine howling. Climbed to 600 feet. Reset. Tried again. The American was still there, 50 feet above the waves, flying like the ocean was holding him up. Brennan felt the tracers pass overhead and knew with absolute clarity that this Japanese pilot was better than most. Better than Johnny Mason's killer. Better than the ones who had scattered when he dove. This one understood geometry, understood patience, understood that skill mattered more than altitude when you got down to the fundamentals of trying to kill another man before he killed you. Morrison's voice in his head calm as dawn over wheat fields. When you got no room left, boy, you make room out of what you got. Use the swells, use the light, use everything. He jinked right hard enough to make the airframe groan. A wave crest rose in his peripheral vision. He dropped to 30 feet using the trough between swells as cover. The Zero's next burst went high. 2 minutes gone. 6 to survive. Yamamoto felt frustration building like pressure behind his eyes. The American was not flying by instinct. This was practiced, deliberate. Someone had trained him to fight down here, where the margin for error was measured in inches and fractions of seconds. He adjusted his approach, came in from the side instead of a behind, throttled back to match the Corsair's speed, waited for the moment when the American would have to choose between turning and hitting the water. The moment came. Yamamoto fired. Brennan saw the muzzle flash in his mirror and made a choice that would have gotten him killed at any other altitude. He chopped the throttle, dropped 15 degrees of flap. The Corsair decelerated from 200 miles per hour to 140 in 3 seconds. The Zero shot past him like a train missing a station. For half a second, the two aircraft were parallel, close enough that Brennan could see the pilot's face through the canopy. Young, maybe 21, eyes wide with shock that was already turning to understanding. Brennan had a perfect gun solution. His modified sight lined up on the Zero's engine cowling. His finger rested on the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns ready to turn the enemy fighter into falling metal and burning fuel. He did not fire. The moment stretched and snapped. The Zero climbed away. Brennan slammed his throttle forward, rolled hard left, disappeared into the glare and spray. 3 minutes. 5 to go. Yamamoto pulled into a climbing spiral mine racing faster than his engine. The American had spared him, had him dead to rights, and chose not to shoot. Why mechanical failure gun jam, or something else, something that made no sense in the context of war and duty and everything he had been taught about enemies who fought without honor? He keyed his radio. The American fights with skill, requesting support. The response came flat and final. Negative. Fuel critical. Return to base. Yamamoto looked down at the Corsair still threading between swells at an altitude that seemed physically impossible. He had fuel for 3 more minutes of combat, 3 minutes to kill a man who had chosen not to kill him. He dove again. The next 4 minutes became a masterclass in 2 different philosophies of flight compressed into the smallest possible space. Yamamoto flew with the precision of formal training. Perfect approaches, textbook deflection shooting, the disciplined application of superior performance against an inferior opponent. Brennan flew like a farmer. He used the water the way he had used irrigation ditches and fence lines in the particular geography of flying low where every landmark mattered. A swell coming up fast meant hard right. Sunlight on the water meant the Zero would be blinded for half a second. Wind patterns on the surface told him where turbulence waited to shake a pursuing fighter's aim. Yamamoto got close twice more. Once he raked the Corsair's tail with machine gun fire. Fabric tore. Metal pinged. Brennan felt the hits like punches to his own body, but the aircraft kept flying because Corsairs were built by men who understood that planes needed to absorb damage and still bring pilots home. The second time Yamamoto tried a high side pass diving from 800 feet with perfect geometry and good intentions. Brennan popped to 100 feet just as he fired, then dropped back to 40. The shells went between the two altitudes, hitting nothing but air and frustration. 6 minutes, 2 to go. Brennan's fuel gauge kissed empty. His hands ached from holding the stick in air that fought every input. His eyes burned from spray and concentration and the particular strain of flying for 6 minutes without blinking, because blinking meant dying. The Zero made one final pass, this one different from the others. Yamamoto came in from directly behind, matching speed, exactly holding position 200 feet back. Gun solution perfect. Range perfect. Every advantage of training and equipment and position in his favor. Brennan saw him in the mirror, saw the Zero hold steady, saw the moment stretch into something that felt like a conversation between men who spoke different languages but understood the same truth. They had both chosen not to kill each other when they could have. Brennan at 3 minutes, Yamamoto now. The Zero pulled up and away, turned north toward Rabaul. Yamamoto's voice came across the international distress frequency in broken English. "You fight with honor, American. We will meet again." Then he was gone. Brennan flew alone for another 12 minutes, fuel gauge reading 0, engine running on vapor and prayers. The coastline appeared through haze like a promise the universe had no obligation to keep. He coaxed the Corsair up to 500 feet, then 1,000, trading the ocean's grip for enough altitude to glide if the engine quit. It quit at 2 miles from Taquina. The propeller windmilled to a stop. The cockpit went quiet except for wind noise and his own breathing loud in his ears. He set up for a dead stick landing, trimmed for best glide, committed to a choice that could not be unmade. The runway appeared. The Corsair settled onto it like a bird coming home tired. He rolled to a stop, climbed out on legs that barely held him, and collapsed sitting on the wing. Sergeant Tucker reached him first, face pale, hands shaking. "Sir, we lost you on radar. Thought you were gone." Brennan looked at his hands. They were still trembling. Not gone. Just found out where they won't follow. Captain Morgan arrived next, furious and relieved in equal measure. His office. Now. The debriefing lasted 2 hours. Brennan told the truth because lying would have dishonored what had happened. He had engaged 1-0 at wave top level for 8 minutes. Had been spared when he should have been killed. Had spared in return. Had survived by flying in a way that broke every rule and somehow worked anyway. Major Hayes watched the gun camera footage 3 times without speaking. The film showed things that should not have been possible. A Corsair at 50 feet, a Zero following. The dance. The moment when Brennan had a kill and chose otherwise. The final pass where the Japanese pilot did the same. Hayes looked at Brennan with eyes that had seen too much war to be surprised by anything, but found himself surprised anyway. "You spared him." "Yes, sir." Why Brennan thought about how to explain Morrison, about bacon and breakfast and the particular grace of a country that fed you before it asked you to die, about how sometimes you looked at another man through gun sights and saw yourself reflected back. "I don't know, sir. Felt wrong to shoot someone that good when he couldn't defend himself." Morgan exploded. "Wrong, he was trying to kill you. That's what we do here. We kill them before they kill us. He had me dead to rights at least twice, sir. Chose not to shoot. Seemed fair to return the favor." The room went silent. Hayes broke it. "Can you teach this?" The low-altitude tactics. Brennan thought about William Patterson, 19 years old, MIT, engineering student who would volunteer in 2 weeks. Thought about all the men who would live because someone showed them another way to fight. "It's dangerous, sir. Someone will die learning it." Hayes nodded. "More will die if we don't try." That night, Brennan wrote a letter to Sarah he would never send. Told her about the chase, about the Japanese pilot who flew with honor, about the choice he made that felt right in his gut, even if it violated everything the manual said about war. He folded it carefully and put it with the other letter, the one that smelled like home. David Chen found him after midnight. "Heard you had quite a day. Met someone who could have killed me 3 times. Didn't. Why not?" Brennan shook his head. Don't know. Maybe the same reason I didn't kill him. Maybe sometimes in all this, you see another man doing his job and you just can't pull the trigger. Chen sat beside him in silence, then said the thing Brennan needed to hear. You're still a good man, Jack. Don't let this place take that from you. 3,000 miles west, Takeshi Yamamoto landed at Rabaul with questions that would not quiet. He filed his report in careful language that did not mention mercy or honor, or the moment when he chose to let an enemy live. Engaged American fighter at low altitude. Target used unconventional tactics. Broke contact due to fuel constraints. His commander accepted the report without comment. Yamamoto walked to his quarters through air that smelled of aviation fuel and jungle rot, and the particular decay of an empire losing ground it would never reclaim. That night, he wrote to his mother. The censors would read every word, so he kept it simple. I am well. I fly for the emperor. I do my duty. Nothing about the American. Nothing about the choice. Nothing about the growing certainty that everything he had been taught was a lie. 2 days later, Major Hayes called for volunteers. 12 pilots gathered in a hangar that smelled of aviation fuel and nervous sweat. Hayes stood before them with Brennan at his side. Lieutenant Brennan has developed a tactical innovation. It's dangerous. It requires precision flying at altitudes where one mistake means death. But it works. He engaged a Zero at 50 feet for 8 minutes and survived. More than survived. He controlled the fight. If you're willing to learn, he'll teach you. William Patterson raised his hand first, called Billy by everyone who knew him. 19 years old. MIT engineering student who enlisted after Pearl Harbor because he believed in equations and right angles and the idea that smart men could outthink any problem. You really flew at 50 feet, sir. 50 or lower, Brennan said, for 8 minutes. And it worked, I'm standing here. Patterson grinned. I'm in. David Chen volunteered, as did Rick Palmer, whose best friend had died following doctrine 2 weeks prior. 8 pilots total. 3 would not survive the training. 5 would carry the knowledge into combat and save dozens of lives. They began the next morning. Brennan took them up one at a time, started at 500 feet, worked down to 200, then 100. Patterson was a natural. His engineering mind understood the physics immediately. Ground effect, drag reduction, the way dense air stabilized the airframe. He flew to 75 feet on his second try. Easy, Billy. Brennan's voice crackled through the radio. You got the concept. Don't push it yet. But Patterson was 20 and brilliant and believed that understanding something meant mastering it. On his 4th training flight, February 28th, he took the Corsair to 40 feet and attempted a high G-turn that would have worked at 5,000 feet. At 40 feet, there was no room for error. The wingtip caught a swell. The Corsair cartwheeled. Billy Patterson died before the aircraft stopped tumbling. The ocean took him in seconds. They never recovered the body. Brennan stood on the beach where the search boats returned empty-handed and felt something break inside that would never quite heal. Captain Morgan found him there at sunset. He knew the risks, Morgan said quietly. They all do. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. That evening, Brennan wrote to Patterson's parents, told them their son died learning to save others, told them Billy was brave and smart and everything they raised him to be, did not tell them that he woke up at night seeing Patterson's Corsair hitting the water and wondered if teaching men to fly at 50 feet made him a murderer with good intentions. But 7 pilots remained, and the training continued. By March, they had it down, not all of them. 2 more washed out, unable to make the mental adjustment required to trust the ocean to save them. But 5 mastered it. 5 men who could take a Corsair to 50 feet and stay there through evasive maneuvers that would have killed them a month before. The first combat test came March 14th. A strike on Rabaul, 6 Corsairs, 12 bombers. Brennan and 2 trained pilots, Chen and Palmer, flew low-altitude screen. The Zeros came as expected, 15 fighters bouncing from above. 3 followed Brennan's group down. This time it was not 1 American against 1 Japanese pilot. It was 3 Corsairs at 50 feet using tactics the enemy had never seen in numbers. The first Zero tried the classic diving attack. Palmer jinked left at the last second using a swell as reference. The Zero pulled up to avoid the water. Palmer popped to 100 feet, got gun solution fired. The Zero exploded. The second Zero tried a beam attack. Chen used the throttle chop technique Brennan pioneered. The Zero overshot. Chen killed it at 200 yards. The third Zero was smarter. stayed at 300 feet, stalking patient. Brennan recognized the discipline. This pilot understood what they were trying to do. He climbed to meet the threat, abandoning low altitude temporarily to protect his wingman. The fight lasted 4 minutes. Brennan killed the Zero at 500 feet using conventional tactics. But the point was made. 3 Zeros engaged, 3 killed, 0 American losses. The gun camera footage spread through the squadron like wildfire. Hayes showed it to every pilot who would watch. Morgan grudgingly admitted it worked. By April 12, pilots were trained. By May, the tactics were being taught at Pensacola to new fighter pilots before they shipped to the Pacific. And in Tokyo, intelligence officers compiled reports from surviving Zero pilots who spoke of Americans who would not climb, who fought from the wave tops, who used the ocean itself as a weapon. One report filed in June 1944 came from a squadron commander at Rabaul. The Americans have developed ghost tactics. They fly so low our pilots cannot track them. Depth perception fails. Attack angles compress. We lose aircraft attempting pursuit. Recommend specialized training for low altitude interception. The Japanese adapted. By July, they were training pilots specifically to counter the American wave-top fighters. Not at 50 feet, that was suicide even for experienced Zero pilots, but at 200 to 500 feet low enough to deny the Americans their altitude advantage, high enough to maintain some safety margin. The war evolved. The advantage Brennan pioneered lasted 4 months before the enemy learned to match it. But 4 months at 50% lower loss rates meant dozens of pilots came home who would have died following doctrine. The math was brutal and beautiful. Billy Patterson's death bought 67 lives. Brennan never stopped doing the math, never stopped visiting Patterson's name on the memorial rumble at Tokina, never stopped wondering if there was a better way. On March 18, 1944, over Truk Lagoon, Navy Hellcats bounced a formation of Zeros escorting a supply convoy. Yamamoto's engine took hits. Oil pressure dropped. He crash-landed in the water 2 miles from shore. A submarine surfaced. American sailors pulled him from the wreckage alive and stunned, and suddenly a prisoner of the people he had tried to destroy. The transport ship smelled of diesel and paint and too many men living in too small a space. Yamamoto and 47 other Japanese prisoners sat in a hold designed for cargo guarded by Marines who looked too young to shave. They were fed twice a day. White bread, canned meat, coffee, apple pie for dessert. Yamamoto stared at the pie like it was a test. A prisoner beside him, older, a veteran of China, spoke quietly. "They give us this to weaken us, to make us forget our duty." Yamamoto picked up the pie, tasted it. The sweetness hit his tongue like a revelation. He had never eaten anything like this in his life. Not in Japan, where rationing meant going hungry most days. Not in training, where rice and fish were stretched thin across too many meals. This was not propaganda. This was abundance. He finished the pie and felt something crack in his understanding of the enemy. A country that could feed its prisoners better than Japan fed its warriors was not weak. It was something else entirely. The train ride across America took 5 days. Yamamoto pressed his face to the window like a child watching a continent he had been taught to despise. Cities intact, farms prosperous, people going about their lives with a normalcy that seemed obscene when his own country was being bombed to rubble. They crossed Kansas on a spring morning when the wheat was coming up green and the sky stretched forever. Yamamoto thought about his mother's garden in Tokyo, how she coaxed vegetables from exhausted soil, how hunger had become so normal he forgot what satisfied felt like. America was huge, undamaged, rich beyond any propaganda's ability to explain away. The cognitive dissonance built like pressure in his chest. Camp Concordia sat on flat prairie that reminded Yamamoto of pictures he had seen of Mongolia. Endless sky, endless grass, a compound surrounded by wire that seemed more suggestion than barrier. No guard towers, no machine guns, just wire and a few bored soldiers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. Corporal Jim Wilson was 35 years old, Texas-born, a rancher before the war, and a rancher after if he survived. He had kind eyes and rough hands and the particular patience of a man who raised cattle for a living. He met Yamamoto's transport with a clipboard and instructions delivered in English too fast to follow. Rules are simple. Work when assigned. No trouble. Treat everyone with respect. You get respect back. Try to run well. There's about 500 miles of nothing in every direction. Might want to think twice. The barracks smelled of wood and disinfectant, and men trying to maintain dignity in captivity. Yamamoto claimed a bunk, unpacked his few possessions, sat in silence while other prisoners speculated about their fate. Torture, execution, slow starvation. The propaganda had been specific about American brutality. Nothing happened. They were fed dinner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans and bread. More food in one meal than Yamamoto had seen in a week back home. He ate mechanically, waiting for the punishment that never came. The first month passed in a fog of confusion. Prisoners worked on local wheat farms, labor allowed under Geneva Convention rules. The farmers were polite. They waved. They shared water during breaks. Their wives sometimes brought sandwiches and lemonade and pie that tasted like the pie on the transport ship, sweet and impossible and real. Jim Wilson checked on Yamamoto's barracks every evening. Never harsh, never cruel, just present. He shared cigarettes, talked about his ranch, asked questions about Japan that suggested genuine curiosity rather than interrogation. Where you from, son? Tokyo? That a big city. Very big, many people. You got family there, my mother, my sisters. Wilson nodded, pulled on his cigarette. They doing okay? Yamamoto did not know how to answer, did not know if his family was alive or dead or buried under American bombs. I hope so, me too, Wilson said. And that was that. The contradiction was unbearable. These were the monsters, the demons, the people without souls who would rape and murder and destroy everything pure about Japan. That's what the teachers said, what the officers said, what everyone said. But Wilson shared cigarettes and asked about mothers. The farmers waved and smiled. The children who came to watch the prisoners work showed no fear, only curiosity. One small boy, maybe 7, sold Coca-Cola from a wagon for 5 cents a bottle. Yamamoto had never tasted Coca-Cola. He bought one with script the camp provided. The carbonation surprised him. The sweetness overwhelmed. The boy grinned. You like it, Mr. Yamamoto's English was poor, but getting better. Yes. Good. Thank you. The boy took the nickel and ran off happy. No fear, no hatred, just a transaction between a child and a man who happened to be on opposite sides of a war neither one of them started. That night, Yamamoto lay in his bunk and tried to reconcile what he had been taught with what he was living. The reconciliation would not come. On June 15th, 3 months into captivity, local church ladies brought Sunday dinner to the camp. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, biscuits with butter, sweet tea so sugary it made Yamamoto's teeth ache. He refused to eat. Pride demanded it. His instructors' voices demanded it. Do not accept their charity. Do not become weak. Maintain your spirit even in captivity. He lasted 3 days. The smell of fried chicken haunted him. Crispy skin and hot grease and the particular aroma of food cooked with care instead of necessity. His stomach cramped with hunger. His head felt light. Other prisoners ate and looked at him with a mixture of pity and confusion. On the 4th day, Jim Wilson found him sitting alone in the mess hall after everyone else had finished, placed a plate in front of him, 2 pieces of chicken, a biscuit, some potatoes still warm. You're going to starve yourself to death for what Wilson asked. Pride, your officers ain't here to see it. Your emperor ain't counting how many meals you skip. Just you and me and some chicken that's getting cold. Yamamoto stared at the plate. I cannot. It is weakness. Wilson sat down across from him, lit a cigarette, studied him with eyes that had seen cattle die from stubbornness. Son, I'm gonna tell you something. Eating ain't weakness. It's just eating. You think refusing food makes you strong, but all it does is make you dead. And dead men can't go home when this is over. The logic was undeniable. The hunger was overwhelming. The smell was unbearable. Yamamoto picked up a piece of chicken, bit into it. The taste exploded across his tongue. Crispy, juicy, seasoned with salt and pepper, and something he could not identify but tasted like every meal he had ever dreamed about during rationing. Tears came without permission. They ran down his face while he chewed. He could not stop them, could not control them, could not do anything but eat and cry and feel his entire worldview crumbling like the crust on the chicken. Wilson did not look away, did not mock, just smoked his cigarette and waited. When Yamamoto finally controlled himself enough to speak, his voice came out broken. Why? Why, you kind of enemy? Wilson stubbed out his cigarette, considered the question, spoke slowly. Because you ain't my enemy no more. You're just a young man far from home, same as my nephew in France, same as all these boys in uniform. War made us enemies, but war's gonna end someday. And when it does, I'd rather have treated you like a man than like an animal. That's the difference between us and them, son. We remember you're human even when you're trying to kill us. The words settled into Yamamoto like seeds in soil. He finished the chicken, ate the biscuit, drank the water Wilson brought him, and something fundamental shifted in his understanding of who the enemy was and what America represented. That night he wrote another letter to his mother he could not tell the truth in. I am treated well. The Americans are not as we were taught. I am learning things I wish I could share with you. When I come home, we will have much to discuss. The months passed, summer turned to fall. Yamamoto learned English from Wilson and the farmers. Learned about baseball from the games the guards played in the evenings. Learned about a country that was messy and loud and contradictory and somehow still believed in the idea that all men deserve dignity. In August of 1945, the camp gathered around a radio to hear the Emperor's voice. His words came thin and crackling across the Pacific. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The phrase was diplomatic. The meaning was clear. Japan had lost. Yamamoto sat in the mess hall and felt nothing. No shame, no anger, just exhaustion. It was over. Millions dead, cities burned, and for what? For lies about American weakness that dissolved the first time you tasted their food or met their kindness. Jim Wilson found him after the announcement, put a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, son. I know that's hard. Yamamoto looked up at him. We tried to destroy you. Yeah, but you're still a human being. And now we got to figure out how to live together. The answer seemed obvious to Yamamoto. In that moment, sitting in a Kansas POW camp, eating American food, learning American values. You already showed us how. Across the Pacific, Jack Brennan flew his final missions. June through August 1945, the island-hopping campaign ground toward Japan. Okinawa was the last major battle before the planned invasion that never came. June 21st, 1945, the largest air battle Brennan would ever see. 50 Japanese fighters defending what remained of their homeland's outer defenses. 6 American Corsairs running low-altitude screen for 30 bombers. Brennan led the screen, Chen on his right wing, Palmer on his left. 3 more behind, all trained in the tactics that had kept them alive when so many others died. The Zeros came in 3 waves, high, medium, low. The Japanese had learned. They no longer gave the Americans the ocean. They compressed the fight into the space between 500 and 5,000 feet, denying both the vertical advantage and the wave-top sanctuary. It was brutal, professional, deadly. The first wave hit at 0834. Brennan's group dove to 100 feet. 3 Zeros followed. 1 stayed at 300 stalking. Smart, disciplined, the kind of pilot who learned from others' mistakes. Brennan recognized the pattern. This was not 1944 anymore. The enemy had evolved. He climbed to meet the stalker, abandoning the ocean, trusting his training and Morrison's lessons in 6 months of combat that had sharpened his instincts to something beyond thought. The Zero pilot was good. 23 years old, if he survived, trained specifically to counter American low-altitude tactics, flying with the desperation of a man defending his home. They merged at 800 feet. Brennan used every trick he knew. High yo-yo, scissors. Pure turning fight where the Corsair's power mattered more than the Zero's agility. It lasted 90 seconds, an eternity in combat time. Brennan got the shot at 600 feet. The Zero burning and falling. The pilot bailed out. Brennan watched the parachute deploy and felt nothing except tired. The second wave was worse. 5 Zeros, 3 Americans. Chen killed 1. Palmer got hit but kept flying. Brennan killed another in a head-on pass that came down to who flinched first. The Zero pilot flinched. Brennan did not. The third wave never engaged. They saw the math and broke off. 6 American fighters still flying. The bombers untouched. Mission accomplished. Brennan landed with bullet holes in his tail and fuel for 3 minutes. Climbed out, looked at the damage, looked at Chen's Corsair, also shot up but flyable, looked at Palmer's barely holding together. "We did it," Palmer said, voice shaking. "We actually did it." Brennan nodded. Thought about the Zero pilots who died, about Billy Patterson, who never got to fly this mission, about all the weight that surviving meant carrying. "Yeah, we did." That was his last combat mission. The atomic bombs fell 2 weeks later. Japan surrendered. The war ended while Brennan was in San Diego processing out, ready to go home to Sarah in Kansas, and a life that did not require him to kill people at dawn. He rotated home in September. The reunion with Sarah lasted 3 days before he could speak about any of it. She held him while he shook and cried and tried to explain about Billy Patterson and the Japanese pilots and the weight of surviving when so many others did not. "You did your part," she said. "Now come back to us." He tried. Bought 200 acres outside Hayes, flew crop dusters, taught agricultural aviation, buried the memories in work and routine, in the particular mercy of land that needed tending. In December of 1945, Takeshi Yamamoto stood at a train station in Kansas with Jim Wilson beside him. The war was over. Prisoners were being repatriated. He could go home to Japan or stay in America. He chose Japan because his mother needed him and his country needed rebuilding. Wilson drove him to the station, gave him a final gift, a small American flag, the kind children waved at parades, worn and faded and precious. "You ever come back to Kansas, you got a place to stay." Yamamoto bowed deeply. 90 degrees, the bow reserved for those who save your life. "I will never forget your kindness, Yami-san. Never." On the train heading east to the ship that would take him home, Yamamoto held 3 things: the flag, a pair of leather work gloves Wilson had given him, a photograph of himself with Wilson and other guards, all of them smiling like the war was already a memory instead of a fresh wound. He made a vow to himself in that moment. "Someday I will find the pilot who spared me. I will thank him. I will repay the debt of mercy I owe to America. It would take 40 years. But some debts are worth the wait. 39 years is long enough to bury almost anything. Long enough for wounds to scar over and memories to fade into the comfortable haze of things that happened to someone else in a different life. Long enough for 2 men to build families and careers and entire existences in countries separated by an ocean and a war that officially ended in 1945 but never quite finished for those who lived it." In Tokyo, winter of 1985, Takeshi Yamamoto sat in an office that overlooked a city rebuilt from ashes. He was 62 years old now, gray at the temples, reading glasses perched on his nose, 2 children grown and married, a wife who knew pieces of his story but not all of it, a successful career as an engineer building bridges and highways for a country that had transformed defeat into prosperity. But some debts do not fade with time, they compound. They gather interest measured in sleepless nights and questions that will not quiet. For 10 years, Yamamoto had been searching. Flight logs, squadron records, gun camera analysis requested through channels that took patience and persistence to navigate. The American military kept excellent records, better than Japan ever had. Every mission, every pilot, every aircraft assigned down to the tail number. Marine Fighter Squadron 5, MF-124, F-4U Corsair tail number 57, February 5, 1944. The combat that lasted 8 minutes and changed 2 lives in ways neither man understood at the time. Pilot First Lieutenant Jack Brennan, home of record, Hayes, Kansas. Yamamoto held the document with hands that trembled slightly. Not from age, from the weight of carrying a debt across 4 decades. He had promised himself in that POW camp eating fried chicken and crying while Jim Wilson pretended not to notice that someday he would repay what America had given him. Kindness, mercy, the understanding that enemies could become something else if given the chance. He wrote the letter on his lunch break in careful English, polished by 40 years of business with American companies, used his best pen, threw away 3 drafts before settling on words that felt true. "Dear Mr. Brennan, you do not know me, but we met February 5th, 1944 over Rabaul. I was the Zero pilot you spared. I have carried this debt for 41 years. I wish to visit and thank you properly." If you permit, I will come to Kansas this summer. With deepest respect, Takeshi Yamamoto. He mailed it before courage could fail him, then waited through March and April like a man awaiting verdict from a trial he did not remember attending. In Hays, Kansas, spring arrived the way it always did. Sudden, insistent, turning winter brown into green that hurt to look at in the right light. Jack Brennan was 67 years old and still flying crop dusters because sitting still felt like dying, and the sky was the only place his memories did not follow quite so close. Sarah found him in the barn adjusting a carburetor on the Piper Cub when she brought the mail. Her hair was white now. Her hands showed the work of 40 years teaching second grade and managing a farm and loving a man who came home from war but never quite left it behind. She knew his moods, knew when to push and when to let silence do its work. Jack, you got a letter from Japan. He looked up, grease on his hands, confusion on his face. Japan? You do not know anybody in Japan. She handed it to him. The envelope was formal, expensive paper, Japanese characters on the return address alongside English. He wiped his hands on a rag and opened it. Read it twice. Sat down on a hay bale because his legs forgot how to hold him. Sarah watched his face change, saw 40 years of carried weight shift into something she could not quite name. What is it? He handed her the letter. She read it, looked at him. You never told me about this. Tried to forget. So many didn't come home. Felt wrong to dwell on the one I let go. But you remember him. Brennan closed his eyes, saw the zero in his gun sight, the moment of choice. The face through the canopy, young and shocked, and somehow familiar, even though they had never met. Every detail sharp as yesterday, despite 4 decades of trying to soften it. Yeah, I remember. Are you going to write back? He thought about it. Thought about William Billy Patterson's grave in the town cemetery where he placed flowers every June 15th. Thought about David Chen, lost in Korea in 1951, who never got the chance to grow old. Thought about all the weight he carried and whether mercy earned 40 years ago deserved an answer now. Sarah touched his shoulder. He came all this way to say thank you, Jack. Least you can do is let him. Brennan wrote back that evening. 3 sentences. You are welcome here. Come in July. We will talk. July arrived hot and dry, the kind of summer that makes Kansas feel like the surface of some planet where water is a rumor and shade is currency. Brennan drove to Wichita to meet the flight, Sarah beside him, both nervous in ways that felt ridiculous for people their age, but could not be helped. The airport was small, regional, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out like blood on snow. Yamamoto came through the gate wearing a dark suit, despite the heat, carrying a small bag and a wrapped package, and an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. They recognized each other instantly. 40 years in an ocean of aging could not hide what mattered. The eyes were the same, the posture, the particular way each man held himself like he was still ready for combat, even though the war was long over. Yamamoto stopped 3 feet away, set down his bag, bowed deeply, 90 degrees. The bow reserved for those to whom you owe everything. Brennan, awkward with American informality, stuck out his hand. They shook. Both men's eyes were wet. Sarah watched and understood that some moments are too large for words, so she just waited while her husband and a stranger who was not a stranger found their way through emotion to something that looked like peace. The drive back to Hays took an hour. Yamamoto pressed his face to the window like he had done 40 years earlier, watching Kansas roll past in waves of wheat and sky. The landscape hit him with physical force. He had worked these fields as a prisoner, had walked this ground when he believed America was the enemy, and every kindness was a trick designed to weaken his spirit. I was here, he said quietly. Camp Concordia, 1944 to 1945. Brennan looked at him in the rearview mirror. You were in Kansas during the war, Yamamoto nodded. 80 miles from your farm, we did not know. The coincidence felt like something larger than chance. Like the universe had been setting up this meeting for 4 decades and only now decided to reveal the blueprint. The farmhouse sat on 200 acres of wheat in memory. White paint, red barn, the kind of place that looked like it had been there forever, even though Brennan built it in 1946 with hands that shook from more than just the physical labor. Sarah had made dinner, pot roast, mashed potatoes, corn from their garden, apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Yamamoto stood in the kitchen and felt time collapse. The smells were identical to the church lady's dinner in June of 1945, the one where he broke down crying over fried chicken while Jim Wilson told him that eating was not weakness. Mrs. Brennan, this reminds me. He stopped, started again. The church ladies. In 1944, they brought food to the camp. I could not eat for 3 days. When I finally did, I cried like a child. Sarah's eyes went soft. Then you've had real American cooking before. That food saved my soul. I was taught to hate America. Then you fed me, clothed me, treated me like a human being. I could not hate anymore. They ate at the kitchen table with windows open to catch the evening breeze. The conversation came in fits and starts, 40 years of separation, making it hard to find the thread. But food has a way of loosening tongues and softening the spaces between people who should be enemies but are trying very hard to be something else. Brennan told him about Morrison, about crop dusting and the lessons learned at 10 feet that saved his life at 50, about the theory no one believed until it worked, about William Billy Patterson, who died learning it. Yamamoto told him about the propaganda, about being taught that Americans were demons without souls, about Jim Wilson, who shared cigarettes and asked about mothers, about the Coca-Cola from a 7-year-old boy that tasted like everything he had been told was a lie. So we were both prisoners, Brennan said. You in a camp, me in my own guilt. Yamamoto set down his fork. Guilt for what? For the men I did kill, for the ones I saved who later died anyway. For Billy, he was 19. I put him in that Corsair at 50 feet, and he died because I taught him something too dangerous to survive. Yamamoto bowed his head. I understand. I killed many in China, in the Pacific. It is a burden we carry. The weight in the kitchen felt lighter after that, like naming the thing made it smaller. Like two men who had carried the same burden alone could share it and find it less crushing with the weight distributed. The next morning, Brennan took him to the hangar, showed him the Piper Cub, the old photographs on the wall. One of them showed F-4U Corsair tail number 57, the same aircraft that had danced with Yamamoto's Zero over the Pacific 4 decades prior. Yamamoto touched the photograph with fingers that barely made contact, as if pressing too hard might shatter the memory. This one, February 5th, 1944. I thought I was dead that day. 11 of you. I thought you were honorable, flying so low. Then I realized you were braver than all of us. You chose a battlefield where one mistake meant death and flew there anyway. Brennan studied him. Why didn't you shoot me? You had me cold at least twice. Yamamoto met his eyes. Because you flew with such skill, such courage. It would have been murder, not war. You had no chance against 11 fighters. And I could not do it. Could not kill a man who showed such spirit. I had you once too. Same reason. They stood in silence, understanding, passing between them like a current in still water. You want to go up? Yamamoto's face transformed. You would fly with me. Why not? War's over. Been over 40 years. They flew together in the Piper Cub on a July morning when the heat made the air shimmer and the wheat below looked like an ocean of gold. Brennan took it down to 10 feet, the old altitude, the safe danger he had known since he was 20 years old learning from Morrison. Yamamoto laughed out loud. The sound shocked them both. When was the last time either of them had laughed about flying, about war, about any of it? Morrison-san taught you well, Yamamoto said. Brennan pulled up slightly. How do you know Morrison's name? You spoke it, in my gun sight. I heard it on my radio before the signal cut out. You were talking to someone, to him, even though he was not there. Brennan felt something catch in his chest. Yeah, I talked to him a lot during the war. Still do sometimes. He died before I enlisted, but his lessons kept me alive. They landed after 20 minutes, both men grinning like idiots, both suddenly feeling 20 years younger and infinitely lighter than they had in decades. That evening, Brennan made phone calls, tracked down Jim Wilson through veterans organizations and stubborn persistence. Wilson was 76 now, still in Texas, still ranching because men like him do not retire so much as slow down until they stop. The conference call took an hour to arrange. When Wilson's voice crackled through the speaker, rough and familiar and full of the particular warmth of a man who had lived well, Yamamoto broke down crying. Jim-san, I never forgot you. Wilson's laugh came through the line like sunlight through clouds. Takeshi, that's you, son, my God. After all these years, I kept your gloves. I have them in Tokyo. I teach my children about American kindness because of you, because of what you showed me when I was a prisoner, and you had every right to treat me like an animal." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Wilson's voice came back thick with emotion. "I knew you'd make something of yourself, boy. I'm proud of you. Proud you took what we tried to show you and made it mean something." Three men separated by 1,000 miles and 4 decades cried together over a phone line, while Sarah Brennan sat at the kitchen table and understood that she was witnessing something larger than reconciliation. This was grace made visible, mercy given form, the proof that the best parts of who we are can survive even war. On July 18th, Brennan took Yamamoto to the town cemetery. The morning was cool, unusual for Kansas in summer, like the weather understood the weight of the visit. They walked between headstones until they reached the one that mattered. William Billy Patterson, 1925 to 1944. Beloved son, he gave his life that others might live. Brennan placed flowers. Sergeant Tucker stood beside them, old, now 81, but he had driven 3 hours from Topeka when Brennan called. Roy Tucker, who had adjusted gun sights and kept Corsairs flying and never forgotten the pilots he served. "I did this every year for 40 years, Brennan said quietly. "Sometimes twice." Yamamoto read the stone silently. 19 years old, so young. He died learning what I taught him. Haunts me. Tucker spoke for the first time. "He died proud lieutenant. Told me the day before. Said he was learning to fly like you. Said it was the most alive he'd ever felt." The words hit Brennan like a physical thing. Tucker continued, "He knew the risks, sir. We all did. But he believed in what you were teaching us. Saved my life twice, those tactics. Okinawa and the Philippines. I'm here because Billy learned to fly at 50 feet before he died." Yamamoto stepped forward, bowed to the grave, spoke in English because Patterson deserved to hear it in his own language, if he was listening from wherever the dead watch the living. "William Billy Patterson, son, you do not know me. I am the enemy your country fought. But I am here because men like you and men like Jack, Brennan's son, showed me that enemies can become friends. Your sacrifice taught others to survive. In Japan, we say a life given for others is never wasted. You are honored. Arigatou gozaimasu." "Thank you." Brennan's voice broke when he tried to speak. "Thank you. I needed to hear that. For 40 years, I needed to hear that." Tucker wiped his eyes. "We all did, sir." They stood together in silence while the wind moved through the grass and the sun climbed higher, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang the song that sounds like Kansas summer. 2 days later at the airport, they exchanged gifts. Yamamoto gave Brennan a katana, family heirloom, grandfather's sword. "This represents honor. You have more honor than any samurai." Brennan gave him Morrison's old leather flight jacket, worn and patched and precious beyond any monetary value. "Morrison would want you to have this. You understand what he taught me." The final words were simple because some goodbyes cannot be complicated or they become impossible. "Will we see each other again, Hi? I will bring my sons next time. They must meet the man who taught me about mercy, and I'll tell them about their father. The bravest Zero pilot I ever faced." At the gate, Yamamoto turned back. "One question, Jackson. Why did America treat us prisoners so well? We tried to destroy you." Brennan thought about Morrison and bacon breakfasts and Sarah's letters and all the small graces that make a country worth defending. Because that's who we are, or who we try to be. We don't always get it right. But when we do, it's because we believe even enemies deserve dignity. Yamamoto bowed one final time. "That is why you won the war. Not with bullets. With this." He pointed to his heart. After he left, Brennan and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sun set over wheat fields that looked the same as they did in Morrison's time and would look the same long after everyone who remembered this war was gone. "That was remarkable," Sarah said. "You know what's remarkable? That kid who gave him a Coca-Cola in 1944 probably has grandkids now, and none of them know they changed a man's life. That's the best kind of change. The kind you don't notice until 40 years later." Brennan flew crop dusters for another 5 years. His hands got stiffer, his eyes got weaker, but he never lost the smoothness Morrison taught him, or the courage the war demanded, or the grace that came from choosing mercy when violence would have been easier. He passed in 1990, peacefully in his sleep, with Sarah beside him, and wheat growing outside the window, and the katana mounted on the wall where morning light caught it just right. He was 72 years old. The obituary listed his birth year correctly. 1918, the year after the First War ended and 4 years before anyone knew another was coming. At the funeral, Takeshi Yamamoto delivered the eulogy. He had flown from Tokyo with his two sons, both engineers like their father, both raised on stories about the American pilot who chose not to kill when he could have. Jack Brennan's-san taught me that courage is not in killing your enemy, but in showing them a better way. He taught me that the strongest nations are not the ones who destroy without mercy, but the ones who extend grace even in war. He taught me that the best victory is the one where both sides walk away with their humanity intact. Roy Tucker sat in the front row uniform, pressed medals worn. Captain Frank Morgan, 91 now, had made the trip from Virginia. David Chen's widow came carrying the folded flag from her husband's casket. The gravestone was simple. Jack Brennan, 1918 to 1990. Husband, farmer, pilot, beloved. It did not mention the Navy Cross, did not mention the 50 missions or the men saved or the tactics that became doctrine. Did not need to. Jack Brennan never wanted monuments. He wanted to come home and teach children to fly and live in a way that honored the men who did not get that chance. He got his wish. In Tokyo, in a glass case in Yamamoto's study, three things sit together. American flag worn and faded. Leather work gloves cracked with age. Photograph of young men smiling in 1945, prisoner and guard enemy, and friend, past and future meeting in a Kansas summer. Yamamoto lived until 2003. Visited Kansas 5 more times, brought his sons, brought his grandchildren, taught them all the same lesson. That mercy is not weakness, that kindness is not surrender, that the measure of a nation is not in how it treats allies, but how it treats enemies when it has the power to destroy them and chooses otherwise. The low-altitude combat tactics pioneered over the Pacific in 1944 are still taught. The gun camera footage still exists in archives, grainy and dramatic, and proof that sometimes the only way forward is down. Every pilot who learns to fly low, to use terrain as a weapon, to deny the enemy the fight they want, carries a piece of that decision made at 50 feet over Rabaul. But the names are gone, filed away in documents most people will never read. Jack Brennan became a footnote in tactical manuals. Takeshi Yamamoto became a paragraph in reconciliation studies. The story faded into the comfortable distance of things that happened long ago to people we never knew. Which is exactly what both men wanted. They did not fight for fame. They fought because their countries asked them to. They showed mercy because something in them understood that the war would end, but the choices they made would echo forever. In flight schools across America, instructors still show the footage. A Corsair skimming the ocean. A Zero pursuing. The dance that should have ended in death and instead ended in understanding. Students watch in silence, sensing they are seeing something that matters, even if they cannot name exactly what. The lesson is never spoken aloud because the best lessons rarely are. But it settles into the bones of everyone who sees it. That war is survived not by those who follow every rule, but by those who know which ones no longer apply when everything is on the line. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not pull the trigger. That mercy, when given freely, compounds across time in ways violence never can. The story does not end with medals or monuments. It ends in a Kansas wheat field where a 72-year-old Japanese man knelt beside an American grave and said thank you to a boy who died learning to fly low. It ends in a phone call between old men who remembered when they were young and the world was on fire and they chose kindness anyway. It ends in every pilot who learns that altitude is not always safety and the ground is not always death. It ends the way the best stories do. Not with a period, but with an ellipsis. Not with an answer, but with an understanding that some questions matter more than their solutions. Somewhere over the Pacific, the ocean that swallowed so much blood and metal and memory continues its patient work. The waves erase. The salt corrodes. The depths keep their secrets. But some things the ocean cannot touch. Mercy given freely. Honor recognized in an enemy. The moment when two men looked at each other through gun sights and chose to be human instead of soldiers. That lives on. Not in stone or bronze or any monument that weathers and fades, but in the choices we make when no one is watching And nothing requires us to be kind except the quiet voice that asks who we want to be when the war finally ends. Jack Brennan heard that voice at 50 feet over the Pacific and chose mercy. Takeshi Yamamoto heard it at 300 feet and chose the same. And 40 years later, they sat at a kitchen table in Kansas eating pot roast and apple pie and proved that the best victories are the ones where everyone gets to go home. The war ended in 1945, but the peace took 4 decades and a reunion between strangers who were never really strangers at all. Just two men who understood, in the moment it mattered most, that being right was less important than being human. That understanding is their legacy. Not written in manuals, not carved in stone, just passed from one generation to the next through stories about the farmer who flew low and the Zero pilot who learned that enemies are only enemies until someone shows them otherwise. The wheat grows in Kansas, the sun rises over Tokyo, and somewhere in the space between memory and meaning, two warriors who should have killed each other are flying together at 10 feet above the earth, laughing like the war was just a dream they both woke up from at the same time. That is how this story ends. Not with victory or defeat, but with grace. And grace, when you let it work, has no ending at all. The end.